then and now, the hospitality culture in bringing people together for food and fellowship is something that's much stronger than in our own country. People have conversations and discussions about issues, not necessarily because they need someone's insights to help them understand it, but including people in the conversation to build friendships. It's doing things more together than we would routinely do in our individualist culture in the West and in this country. It's a culture where people are struggling, majority of people struggling to get enough to eat and are living from day to day. Getting an invitation to a banquet was really special. Not quite as much as a garden party at Holyrood. That's a different level up. But certainly something that's really special. And if you got an invitation to a banquet, you would want to say yes. I'd be delighted to accept that invitation because it didn't come that often. To honor your social superior or to honor someone who's your equal, depending on your position in society. So the story we're going to look at, the reaction of the guests who were invited, is absolutely scandalous. There'd have been a shock going around the crowd when Jesus outlined the responses these people gave. So back to the beginning of the story here. Someone shouts out in the crowd, "Blessed is the one who'll eat at the feast in the kingdom." What's the context in which they said those words? Well, Jesus was speaking about how when you give a banquet or a special meal, don't just invite people who can invite you to their house for a meal as well. Think about the people who have so little they could never afford to do that. Be especially welcoming to them. And what this person is saying is effectively a kind of an amen, to use a bit of church language. Yes, I'm with you. What a great idea to do that. And the man says, "Blessed is the one who's going to eat at the feast in God's kingdom." Well, it's going to be great feast here, but how much more in God's eternal kingdom? That picture of heaven was a lovely banquet, a permanent banquet of great meals and food in abundance. And you can see why in their culture. Nothing about sitting on clouds and harp playing, which sometimes is the caricature in our culture. For them, it was about banquets, lovely dinners and food. And so they're getting excited about what God has prepared for the future beyond this life. So it comes back to you and I. Are you excited as a Christian about the future God's prepared for you beyond this life? I hope you can say yes to that. As we get a bit older and it gets a little closer and we know more people who've gone, that can be more attractive. Maybe when we're younger we think, I've got years to go. I don't want to be thinking about life after this life. So, where did they get this picture of about a banquet from? Well, it comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 25, verses 6 to 9. And this is the passage. "On this mountain the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines. On this mountain he'll destroy the shroud that enfolds all people, the sheet that covers all nations. He'll swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away all tears from all faces. He'll remove his people's disgrace from the earth. The Lord has spoken." So the question comes quite simple. Who does God envisage at the banquet? Is it just a few? Is it just people from the Holy Land? Just Jewish people? Is it just... No, of course. It's a big picture of people from all kinds of backgrounds. God's a generous God whose picture of welcome is to all who receive the invitation. Have you received your invitation? This vision of God welcoming and inviting. So John in Revelation, that vision in Revelation 7 of all the peoples from different tribes and nations, people groups, all being there in heaven. That's confirming, affirming the vision that's given here in Isaiah 25. And they really get that clearly if you read the message directly in our Bible. But do you need to be assured, as they did, of God's provision for your daily needs? Have you come today worrying about something that's coming up this week? To know that our God is our provider, the one we can trust with our future, even in those difficult times. The way God does it is not always the way we hope for, but to trust him with our future. But there's the elephant in the room in the story that's not easy to pick up for the people of that day. Why does Jesus repeatedly bring up this message about the banquet and who's welcome in his messages? It kind of seems obvious to us, but the popular version in Aramaic, which was the language that people spoke, that the people would have had, was not translated well. There's an issue. The Targum translation of Isaiah 25:6 says this: Yahweh of hosts will make, this is the Targum Aramaic translated into English, that Yahweh of hosts will make for all the peoples in this mountain a meal. So far, so good. And although they suppose it's an honor, it'll be a shame for them and great plagues, plagues from which they'll be unable to escape, plagues from whereby they'll come to their end. It's not about welcome to all. The meal will be not for the good of the Gentiles at the feast. They're not welcome. So what's the context out of which that was written? You remember a few hundred years earlier, Jerusalem was destroyed. The Babylonians, the Iraqis we call them today, obliterated the place. People, many dead, others in exile as slaves. The idea of sharing heaven with people who would do things like that was problematic. It's easy for us to say how narrow-minded, but when people have really suffered, and we haven't, it's hard to put ourselves in the shoes of people who might struggle to welcome others. And a picture of heaven where people who might be there, although they might be forgiven, it's not going to be easy for me to be there with people like that. So Jesus is actually challenging a version, a mistranslated version of God's generous hospitality from Isaiah. The Bible, or the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, was read in the synagogues in Hebrew, but most of the people didn't understand Hebrew, so it was then translated into Aramaic, the language of the people. That's why there was the issue of how that could happen. It's a warning that sometimes in our culture, in what we hear, what we read, not to accept uncritically information that comes to us. There's so much out there that's not accurate. So in this context, Jesus tells the story to get things back on track, to help people to see God's big picture of his generous welcome. Luke 13, he says, when you see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the prophets in the kingdom of God, but you yourselves thrown out, people will come from the east and west and north and south and take their place at the feast in the kingdom of God. Now we know in the Christian history, the start of the early church, that people from all kinds of backgrounds, you can see it listed in Acts chapter 2, coming to put their trust in Jesus. That's just getting back on track what God intended of the message for the nations. Right from Genesis, the message to Abraham, in you will all the nations be blessed. Isaiah 60, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. Nations will come to your light. It's that bigger vision of generous grace. The old hymn that used to be sung, "We've a story to tell to the nations." A message of the gospel of good news for everyone. But to come back to the present, is there somebody who I don't really want to tell about Jesus? Or someone I might struggle to picture being in heaven alongside me? For some people, this can be a very real situation. Let's go to Cambodia. In 1996, a man called, well, his nickname is Dutch. He had a different name in Cambodian, a longer name. Was baptized in a church. And he was working at the time as a maths teacher in a high school. However, investigative journalists found out who the man really was. He was Pol Pot's number 2, the man who oversaw the killing of people around the capital of the country, so probably responsible for killing about 1.3 million people. How do you think they felt in the congregation, hearing about this new member? Now, of course, there's a trial, and he got life imprisonment, and he died in 2020 in prison. There's another twist to that story. He was brought up in a Christian home, one of very few in Cambodia at the time. He went away from it completely. His mother was praying for him to come to faith. She may not have lived to see that happen. But others understand Cambodian Christians welcoming former Khmer Rouge guerrillas who killed more than 2 million people. Now that's an extreme situation. But there are people we struggle to get on with. Is there someone God's putting on your heart today to pray for who needs Jesus? So what about the responses from the invited guests? So this is an honor and shame culture. It's the Middle East. You don't dishonor somebody else. That's the thing that you give, and affirming a positive response. So you're invited to the banquet, and so you'll say yes. In a context of food insecurity, even the rich were careful with the food. So they'd ask in advance, can you come? So they're planning. So there's not too much food going to be bought. And then they check nearer the time, just final confirmation. Are you able to come? Definitely. And the food's cooked so that nothing's wasted. But here at the very last minute, when the money's been spent, the work's been done, there's a first excuse. I bought a field and I must go and see it. Agricultural land in the Middle East, it was so rare that it came up for sale. Go back to the Old Testament. Remember, King Ahab wants Naboth's vineyard. It's just down the road from the palace. It's a nice place. It's nearby. Will you sell it? And Naboth said, I can't. It's my family's property. We've had it in the generations. It's going to be my kids and my grandkids and whatever else have it in the future. There's no possibility we can sell it. In that culture, if it ever actually did come up for sale, you'd spend months, even years, of looking and talking about the deal, about the possible yields, about the amount of sunlight it would get, the drainage, etc. It wouldn't happen quickly. The nearest equivalent I could think of, just imagine a home in Broughty, Ferry. The family is sitting down at the table, and a member of the household said, I've just bought us a new house. And conversation stopper for definite. And other people look around the room and say, where? And you name the place. You say, well, what's it like? I haven't looked at it. How many bedrooms? Don't know. But the price looked good. And everyone's thinking, even if they're a really nice person, some very, very difficult thoughts. And I suspect in most households, some strong words might be being uttered. It's It simply wouldn't happen. Nobody in this room would even entertain doing anything like that. I've only once come across someone who did that in a previous community. And his wife was a member of the church I was pastoring at the time, and she came to see me. She was struggling with hard thoughts. It was totally implausible to do something like this. So excuse number 2. I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen. I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. Well, the comfortably well off would have had 1 pair of oxen for ploughing their little field. If you're wealthy, you might have had a few. Here, 5. That's a pretty big investment. And you don't know whether they can do the job. Now, the very wealthy could have a lot. Remember, Elijah called Elisha to be his successor, and Elisha's from a wealthy family. He had 11 yoke of oxen. This is a prosperous background in the Old Testament. So, in real life, what would have happened if yoke of oxen were being sold? Prospective buyers would go and see them working first. You'd see what they could do. Were they young ones who'd just been trained? Were they old ones who were, well, really ready for animal retirement? Were they in the peak of life when they got years of work to come? The idea, even if you'd done all of that and you bought them, that you couldn't give the animals a day off so you could go to the party, is utterly ludicrous. It's a little less implausible than the previous one, but it's an excuse. So today, a businessman a woman might buy industrial machinery for their business from a trade journal. You're desperate, your machinery's broken down and you can't easily get something, so you may take a chance. But there's a risk that somebody's selling it because it's not working well, and they're just wanting to get some cash. Or maybe you buy a car on spec without looking at it for an advert in a local paper, without viewing or test driving it. It could be a bargain, but it's a big risk. I probably wouldn't want to do that. And then there's excuse 3, which is the worst of all. I've just got married, so I can't come. That is wrong on so many levels. So imagine, weeks before, got the invitation, and the person hasn't remembered they're getting married. That's a big, big question mark there. It wasn't just the day event as here. This is a whole week of celebrations. This is serious, and the whole community is involved. The idea that a few weeks ahead you don't realize you're getting married, there's a lot of things you need help with if you're in that place. Now, looking at it carefully, the actual wedding celebrations are being described as having finished, so the people have gone back to their homes. So you are married. But what the person's actually saying is, I've not been married that long. I'm having a romantic night in with my wife, with nothing else on in the diary, but we're staying home, even though you've already cooked the food you've gone to the expense of preparing. It could not be more offensive than that. How would you react if you prepared a nice meal for people and they came up with such implausible excuses just before, when the food's already cooked in your house? I think you'd have some hard thoughts about the people. So how does the householder, the host of the feast, react? He's rightly angry. But he chooses to channel the anger in a positive way, to say the people who are invited, they've not come, but I will invite others. The people on the margins of society, maybe the homeless, of other people who could never afford to invite him back. Now, there's parables of Jesus Other parables where it speaks of the generosity of God and God's welcome. And it goes further, of total strangers. Now, the language is quite strong, and it was misused by Augustine in terms of compelling people to come to church in his day, in the 4th century. But if you were a total stranger, just imagine there's a function on in a hall, a room in Brook Street, and you're walking along Brook Street one evening, and there's somebody inviting people into the party. And a total stranger invites you into their party. Would you accept it? Is there anybody here who would instantly say, yes, I'll come? You wouldn't, would you? For so many different reasons. I might not know anybody. You're thinking, are they that desperate that they need to ask total strangers? There's something not right here. Maybe I'm not dressed properly. If it's celebrating someone's achievement, I haven't got a present. There's many good reasons why you'd not want to accept and think, why me? Why is Jesus telling the story? He's wanting them to get a bigger picture of God's generosity, of the amazing love of God who invites us to trust him. He wants to challenge the people of God of that day and to us to have hearts of welcome to all to come in of whatever background, to be a place that's welcoming. I thank God that we are, I believe, a welcoming church, but to continue to be so. To have a heart for people, to welcome them in. But also, if we've been discouraged in the past, we've invited people and they've not said yes, they've said no. To think, who else could I invite and welcome in? So that's our questions for reflection today. Are all people really welcome to join with us? Have I been discouraged by people declining invitations in the past? If I have, to acknowledge that before God. And who else might I invite in the future that I hadn't thought of asking before? To ask the Lord about that. Let's take a few moments before we come to our next song.